Today, we're really excited to introduce you to Working Lands for Wildlife's latest science-based prioritization and monitoring tool, the Mesic Analysis Platform, or MAP for short. Why did we create MAP? Simply put, in the West, water is life. Water scarcity is a defining feature of the region, shaping how people and wildlife use the land. While uplands dry out during the summer, areas where plants continue to have access to water remain productive throughout the growing season. These mesic resources provide a critical lifeline of green groceries that sustain rural ranching operations and support abundant fish and wildlife. Making up just 2% of the landscape, mesic resources are small but mighty. In fact, 80% of all wildlife depend upon them at some point during their annual life cycle. Many wildlife species like sage grouse and migratory big game are known to ride the green wave, making seasonal habitat movements towards mesic resources as surrounding uplands turn brown. Importantly, working agricultural lands are essential for the conservation and restoration of mesic resources. Early homesteaders settled the West near water, and most of those lands remain in private hands today. In fact, more than 75% of the mesic resources are stewarded by private landowners, making partnerships across boundaries critical to successful conservation. So what exactly do we mean by mesic resources? By definition, a mesic area is a type of habitat with a well-balanced or moderate supply of moisture throughout the growing season. In the sagebrush biome, many mesic resources are associated with streams and rivers, including riparian areas, wet meadows, and other wetlands. Mesic resources can also be located in the drier upland setting, such as springs and seeps, and higher elevation herbaceous uplands or north-facing slopes that just simply remain well watered. Unfortunately, due to their outsized importance, mesic resources are prone to degradation. Eroded streams, meadow headcuts, and gullies are all too common signs of mesic degradation across the landscape. Maintaining and restoring the function and resilience of the West's mesic resources is a shared vision benefiting both agricultural producers and wildlife. The picture on the left here shows an incised and degraded stream that lost its green mesic vegetation and now essentially serves as a drainage ditch that rushes water off the land as soon as it falls. Compare that condition to the picture on the right showing a healthy and functioning mesic area. When we can maintain or restore mesic resources to conditions like those pictured on the right, we increase that natural storage capacity of the soil to retain moisture. It's like a piggy bank for those leaner times during the year when water is highly limited. Retaining more water in the soil increases vegetation productivity and ultimately improves the resilience of the land to stresses like drought, fire, and flooding. While there are many important ecosystem services and values provided by mesic resources that we could manage for, focusing on ensuring this foundational capability of our mesic areas to retain soil moisture, grow productive green vegetation, and be resilient to disturbances is a shared vision that rallies really diverse stakeholders to conserve these precious resources. USDA's primary mechanism for delivering large-scale mesic resource conservation is through our Working Lands for Wildlife frameworks for conservation action. Encompassing 17 Western states, frameworks provide the common vision and coordination to address resource concerns and ecosystem threats across state boundaries. Our frameworks focus on reducing primary threats in the sagebrush biome, Great Plains grassland biome, and most recently, our Western migratory big game herds. These frameworks help guide USDA state and local leaders in how they focus Farm Bill technical and financial assistance to help solve landscape scale problems through a locally led voluntary conservation effort with private landowners and partners. Importantly, frameworks align perfectly with regional priorities set by our state fish and wildlife agencies, helping make working lands part of state led solutions. Our frameworks focus on addressing 6 primary threats. Both our sagebrush biome and migratory big game frameworks identify mesic resource degradation as one of those primary threats to address. And for almost a decade, we've actively been working to scale up mesic conservation across the sagebrush biome through our sagebrush framework and our very popular sage grouse initiative. Since we launched our mesic conservation campaign called Water is Life back in 2017, we've trained thousands of practitioners and landowners in mesic restoration techniques who've really run with the idea and what they've learned, implementing hundreds of projects across the West and beyond. Now our staff and partners are coming back to us and starting to look beyond those local success stories and ask, can we be more strategic in where we focus these efforts? And how can we scale up to affect whole watersheds? Meanwhile, we've had huge scientific advancements being made in delivering strategic conservation in the sagebrush biome with the 2022 release of the Sagebrush Conservation Design, or SCD. The SCD provided for the first time a biome-wide perspective on the best remaining, quote, core sagebrush areas and their identified primary threats. The SCD also embraced Working Lands for Wildlife Defend and Grow the Core strategy for tackling these threats that really emphasizes being proactive in protecting core areas over a reactive restoration approach in heavily degraded areas. However, the SCD had one major blind spot. It intentionally focused on just those sagebrush rangelands in the uplands, while ignoring neighboring mesic resources like streams and wet meadows, really missing a key priority identified by both Working Lands for Wildlife and our partners at the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies Sagebrush Conservation Initiative. That's why our team of scientists at the University of Montana embarked on an effort to look beyond uplands and bring mesic resources more holistically back into the planning view for the sagebrush biome by creating the Mesic Analysis Platform. MAP allows federal, state, and local partners, land managers, and producers to align mesic conservation efforts to achieve watershed scale outcomes across the biome. And really quick, before I hand this off to Derek to get into the weeds on the app, we've got to acknowledge a whole team of partners that help make this possible. And those folks are presented here. And in particular, I'd like to thank our scientific leader here, Scott Morford, for his vision and mentoring of Chris in the development of MAP. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Derek.
All right. Thank you, Jeremy. Jeremy covered the challenges and the impacts of mesic degradation, and we've heard a little bit about the benefits of restoring mesic habitats. But now I get to introduce this super cool new tool and platform that we've developed, the Mesic Analysis Platform, or MAP. So MAP brings together spatial data, hydrologic indicators, and sagebrush habitat information into a really awesome suite of integrated tools. It lets you move from broad watershed and landscape level assessments and go all the way down to detailed stream reach specific analyses. So you can really see the big picture and then zoom down into the treatment scale. So to start with, MAP visualizes late season mesic vegetation productivity using satellite imagery collected in the drier late summer months over a 40-year time span, ranging from 1984 to 2025. And we measure productivity using what's called the Normalized Difference Vegetation Index, or NDVI here. NDVI is basically a number scale for greenness with values ranging, as you can see, from -1 to +1, with higher values indicating greater live vegetation productivity, basically more green. And researchers and experts have drawn a line right there at about zero point 0.3, where during these hot, dry summers that we have in the sagebrush biome, most of the upland vegetation will show NDVI values below that zero point 0.3 as soil moisture declines. And in contrast, mesic areas that are supported by persistent soil moisture will maintain higher NDVI values later into the growing season, which allows them to be identified and tracked through time. Second, the Mesic Analysis Platform incorporates the concept of mesic persistence to help distinguish consistently productive mesic areas from locations that only appear productive during unusually wet years. Persistence is simply the percentage or proportion of years in which a location exceeded that zero point 0.3 NDVI threshold. Um, Areas with high persistence are more likely to reflect reliable groundwater influence and long-term hydrologic connectivity. And then areas with low persistence may indicate more intermittent or climate-sensitive mesic systems. So yes, we can look back in time and look at persistence over this 40-year history and not just rely on a single year snapshot. And we can also use this to look at trends and changes over time. So here we see the step-by-step process used to gather the map data. We've got satellite imagery that is collected between July 15th through September 30th in those dry season or in the dry season, running from 1984 through 2025. We apply that NDVI greenness threshold and then calculate persistence. Again, the percent of years above that zero point 0.3 NDVI line, and we plot that onto the landscape. All right, so diving in. The platform includes three integrated modules tailored to different levels of planning and implementation. And we'll go over each one of these in a minute. But just want to point out, you can use these in a stepwise fashion, going from the broad watershed ranking and then move your way down to the landscape level and ultimately to the individual reach scale. Or you can just jump straight into whatever level you're interested in. Each module stands really on its own, but interacts seamlessly with the others. So users don't have to work through every module if you're only interested in one. Okay, first is the Mesic Watershed Prioritization Tool. This one was developed with broad regional and state level planners in mind. So this is those people who are looking to strategically direct Mesic conservation efforts. It's especially, I think, valuable for guiding larger cross-boundary coordination, focusing limited funding and capacity, and integrating these riparian and mesic conservation efforts with broader upland management objectives. This module organizes subwatersheds into a three-tier prioritization framework based on two key factors. Number one, the abundance of persistent mesic vegetation within the floodplains, and two, the connectivity of mesic resources to intact sagebrush uplands and core sagebrush areas following the sagebrush conservation design that Jeremy just mentioned. When you put them together, these metrics help you identify watersheds where conservation or restoration actions are most likely to be useful within the context of the SCD. So here, watersheds in blue have a high percentage of persistent mesic areas, and it's associated, or these watersheds are associated with core sagebrush areas. These are likely part of that defend the core strategy. Tier two, the yellow watersheds have high mesic values, but may benefit from targeted restoration efforts, or it can be a little bit distant or disassociated from the CSAs. Tier 3 watersheds may have lower percentage of functioning music areas, or they may be, very significantly disconnected from core SCD areas. There are several context layers you can add to help with ranking and decision making here. We've added the SCD layer in this image for context. You can see that this subwatershed outlined there in red is nested in some growth opportunity area and is very near some core sagebrush area. We've also got layers for sage grouse habitat, land ownership, and BLM grazing allotments. So if you select on a watershed, the platform generates an analysis of several useful metrics. And just a note here, the values here are from the valley bottoms themselves, not from the entire subwatershed area. Okay, so here you can see up in the top left, vegetation persistence. So we've got 23% of this watershed falls under the high persistence category, with 75% of the 40-year span hitting that greater than the zero point 0.3 NDVI threshold. 14% of the watershed had moderate persistence, with 25 to 74% of the years being green, and so on. We've also got a breakdown on land ownership. So you can see 41% is public land, 59% is privately owned, and 11% of the watershed shows up as being irrigated. We've got proximity and relationship to the sagebrush conservation design. So 67% of the valley bottoms within the watershed are within 5 kilometers of core sagebrush areas or growth opportunity areas. Then we've got some geometry statistics like acres of valley bottoms and subwatershed opportunity tier ranking or classification. And here's just a couple more outputs from the summary report. We've got cool time series analyses of mean late season NDVI there at the top. We've got vegetation cover by functional group from RAP. And we've got average late season drought conditions based on the PDSI, the Drought Severity Index. All right, so module number 2 is the Mesic Landscapes tool. This one shows you a complete picture of all the Mesic resources in a given area, including valley bottoms, as well as any upland Mesic assets. So this module is meant more for field staff, grazing planners, and land managers who need to identify and prioritize Mesic resources, even in the upland rangelands. It also includes riparian trees within the valley bottoms, but it does mask out the upland woody species. The intent here is to really capture the full picture: valley bottom herbaceous plants, riparian corridors, and upland mesic areas like seeps and springs and meadows. So on this one, you'll see dark blue pixels are those consistently productive mesic sites, while orange and red pixels are going to be more episodic or marginal mesic sites. With this tool, you can draw a polygon and again capture some really cool and useful information. We've got the geometry, location and total area. We've got an average NDVI time series, the RAP vegetation cover, and the drought severity index again. So, and this tool really does complement the next module, the valley bottom tool, again, by extending the analysis, not just from the valley bottoms, but up into the uplands. So here we go. Finally, the Mesic Valley Bottoms tool is designed for restoration practitioners looking to identify specific valley bottom segments for assessment and restoration, allowing them to evaluate individual stream reaches and floodplain systems to support project level planning and implementation. Just want to point out this tool leverages the data and work of Joe Wheaton and his crew at the Riverscapes Consortium. Many of you are probably familiar with VBET. What this one shows you is one, the persistence of the mesic vegetation in the segment, and two, the proportion of each stream reach currently supporting productive vegetation relative to its estimated valley bottom extent. It also gives you stream type classification information and proximity of reaches to core sagebrush areas. It'll also show you where streams are prevented from reaching their potential extent and highlights areas for improvement. So if you click on a reach here, the platform provides you all of these various matrices. So we've got the vegetation persistence at 13.5%, and the percent of the floodplain still productive, you can see is way down to 1.3%. And if you look at the view on the right, you can see the stream is very in size and narrow compared to the overall potential floodplain extent. You've got segment size in acres, average slope, average distance to core sagebrush habitat, and distance to growth opportunity areas from the SCD. Then finally, you've got some stream data, and it does provide some thoughts on what's limiting the reach productivity and what opportunities might exist for improvement using the beaver restoration analysis tool from the Riverscapes Consortium. And with that, I'm going to hand this over to Chris for a demonstration.
Thank you, Derek and Jeremy, for providing that great background here on the Mesic Analysis Platform. Now it's my great pleasure today to give a live demonstration of the platform itself, kind of show how you can access some of these layers and use them in your own decision-making planning stages. So when you first visit mesic.app, this is the familiar site you will see. You'll be given the option to either launch the application or learn a little bit more about Mesic here. But we also have some tabs here at the top of the page to learn a little bit more about Working Lands for Wildlife's conservation strategy around the sagebrush biome, as well as a tab to contact us with questions about the platform itself. And so scrolling down on this main page, it'll just offer you a little bit more information as to why Mesic resources are important in the West, as well as sort of how the platform itself works and what sort of data outputs you can expect to see and analyze within the app. But for now, I'm just jump straight into the launch application button here. So when you click this launch application button, as Derek mentioned earlier, you'll be able to pick this planning scale here where you can choose either to go into the Mesic watersheds application here, the Mesic landscapes, or the Mesic valley bottoms. And as Derek mentioned earlier, all of these can be used interoperably within the apps themselves. So you don't have to come back to this page later on if you find yourself using one or two more often than not. But for now, let's start with the Mesic watersheds here and see what that looks like in the app. So when you first open up this Mesic watersheds app, it'll zoom you out to the whole sagebrush biome here outlined in black. I'll just zoom in a little bit so we can see that a little better. But you can see these Mesic watershed tier classifications are on the map pre-populated there. And if we go in the top right here on this layers dropdown and click that, we can see exactly what we're seeing on the landscape. So you're able to turn off and on this watersheds layer. You can change the opacity here with this easy slider. But I'm going to zoom into an area and see kind of what these look like on a more regional scale. So when you hover over these tiered classified watersheds, you'll get that sub-watershed name here. And when you click on one, as Derek pointed out, it'll zoom to that area as well as give you some of those summary statistics from within those valley bottoms across the watershed. So, how much of the valley bottoms are covered in those highly persistent or moderately persistent vegetation, as well as land cover, ownership proportions, as well as some of the geometry and coverage. If you scroll down, you can also see those time series of productivity over time, as well as that wrap vegetation cover. Again, just within those watersheds or just within the valley bottoms of those watersheds themselves. And so to remove this pop out here, you just click this X on the top. And to deselect a watershed, you can click this X in the bottom left. And so you might notice here that we're only showing these classified tiered watersheds, and that's because those are the areas where those mesic resources and sagebrush conservation design overlap the most. But we also have the ability here to show unclassified watersheds, in which you can also hover over those and get the name. Again, if we click on any of these, we can get those same summary statistics here. So just to give you a sense of why this is an unclassified tier in this sense, is because these valley bottoms have little to no productive vegetation as identified during the late growing season. And in fact, most of the valley bottoms had no productive vegetation. But all of them are within these growth opportunity areas as identified by the SCD. So largely these unclassified watersheds are just those that have one or the other important factors. But if you're going to prioritize, say, mesic restoration or conservation in one of these areas, you'll be missing out on sort of that broader sagebrush upland connectivity. So I'm just going to turn off some layers here and zoom back out to the biome, where we'll then switch to our next application, the Mesic landscapes. And so, as Derek said, you can easily switch between these apps seamlessly just by clicking up here in this top left where it currently says Mesic watersheds. If you click this drop down, you'll be able to switch your app between either of the other two here. So switching app here lets us go to either the Mesic landscapes or the Mesic valley bottoms. I will go to Mesic landscapes for now. And so while we're zoomed out at this scale, I just want to use the time to show some of these other context layers we have, as well as the base map layers. So as you can see right now, we're looking at that Mesic landscape persistence layer, which is that pixel level layer, which shows, as Derek explained, all of those Mesic systems across the landscape. I'm just going to reduce that layer opacity here and change our base map to street view, just so we get a better view of some of these context layers on the map. So first we have the sage grouse habitat layer. This largely outlines the Bureau of Land Management priority habitat areas, as well as some Gunnison sage grouse populations and bi-state population polygons. We also have the sagebrush conservation design from 2020. So this will help you identify where those core sagebrush areas are on the landscape. We also provide the valley bottom extents. So this is going to be really useful if you're trying to determine what's an upland system versus a water supported valley bottom system while looking at this mesic persistence layer. We also have BLM allotments. So if you click on anywhere on an allotment, it'll return the name here while this layer is open as well. And land ownership here. So largely just the major federal and state boundaries here on the landscape. So I'm going to go back to the satellite base map view and bring that mesic persistence layer back into view a little more and zoom in a bit, see what this landscape looks like. And so a really cool thing we have here built into the app is this ability to set the minimum years productive here. So currently what we're seeing on the map is our pixels that have only been productive 25% of the years over the last 40. So this is roughly about 10 out of the last 40 years, these pixels had productive vegetation on them. But if we move the slider down here to the minimum of, say, 2% or 1 year out of the last 40, we can see some areas of red here popping up on the upland landscape. So these are largely identifying those, more episodically productive landscapes. Similarly, if we move this minimum years productive slider up to, say, 80%, now we're only seeing those mesic landscapes that were consistently productive over the last 40 years. And so, as Derek mentioned, this default view here is meant to identify those mesic landscapes, so upland seeps, as well as riparian floodplains. So by default, we exclude a lot of this forest cover in the higher elevations, as well as some cultivated agriculture in the uplands. But if you zoom into an area of interest and notice that it's not showing up as having productive vegetation, but it maybe should, you can check this show all productive late season pixels. and it'll then fill in everything from forested cover to anything else on the landscape that was identified as being productive during that late growing season. And so some other cool things we can do here in this app is the ability to click around and get statistics of this persistence layer, as well as draw our own polygons and upload your own polygon. So you see this little floater box here on the left side of the map. By default, the select point is selected. So you can click anywhere on this map and it'll zoom to that point on the map and provide you a lat long of that point, as well as the time series of NDVI over the last 40 years, that vegetation cover, and that drought severity index just at that clicked point. Say you want to investigate an area that maybe has some non-productive resources on the landscape, you can draw a polygon anywhere within the sagebrush biome and it'll still calculate an average persistence and time series over that entire area. So say, for example, I want to include these few persistent areas here, as well as that sort of in-between area that's not showing up. We can just double click that and get that same sort of time series over time of productivity, as well as vegetation cover in that drawn polygon, as well as an area estimation in acres. And so to remove these polygons from the map, you just click this little delete button here. And next I'm going to upload our own polygon using this little up arrow here. And this polygon I'm going to choose here was provided by Jeremy here. And I'm going to open it. It'll zoom right to your polygon of interest. And I'm going to let him sort of explain this in a little more detail.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I love this example and it just shows the breadth of utility. This comes to us from a friend of mine in Central Oregon, Adam Harburg, with the Jefferson County Soil and Water Conservation District. And he actually found this in the earlier versions of this. It was known as the Sage Grouse Initiative Mesic web app. And he stumbled across this looking for a way to quantify the results of his steelhead restoration project. So this had nothing to do with sagebrush, sage grouse, or really a lot of the other stuff we've been focused on, but it happened to occur within the biome where we had data, and he provided this project polygon. And in this piece of private ground, you can imagine a heavily incised stream, Trout Creek, that ran through this area, really important for young juvenile steelhead rearing. And they went in and did a total floodplain reconnection project. So reconstructed it back up to the original floodplain elevation. And they did that in the year 2004. So you can look at the NDVI chart and see that before the restoration project, really that floodplain was dry, desiccated, cheatgrass, sagebrush, below that 0.3 threshold. But after the project, it bounced above that 3.3 threshold and remained there, and is still there today. So you can take those results and see how you've actually bent the curve on the productivity of that site. You see the results there as well in the vegetation cover and the RAP data. So Adam loves to share this data with his funders at Bonneville Power Association and others who've said, wow, this is a powerful way for us to track, one metric of our effectiveness out there on the landscape. So Chris, I'll turn it back over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeremy, for explaining that in a little more detail and just how useful something like this can actually use to see some of those effectiveness outcomes. So I also want to mention here that within all three of these modules, we have this option here at the top of this pop-out to generate a report. And so if you click this, it's just going to take a screenshot of whatever's on your map currently. In this case, it's that polygon and the persistence layer. It'll give you those summary statistics details, as well as all of those time series of that polygon or point. And then you can just save this as a PDF to your computer. All right, so going back out to the biome level, now we'll move on to our final module here, the Valley Bottoms tool. So again, switching to the valley bottoms here from this app is as easy as clicking this drop down and selecting Mesic Valley Bottoms. And so when you first get into the Mesic Valley Bottoms application here, you'll notice that everything is just shaded in blue. And it's not until you zoom in a little closer on the landscape that those valley bottoms or reach segments will actually change to a color. In this case, by default, we have that persistence value as the valley bottoms value here shown. So I'm just going to zoom in a little closer here. Again, this is that same persistence color ramp that we saw in the Mesic landscapes application, where areas of red indicate lower persistence lower vegetation persistence, and areas in blue are those more frequently productive areas. And we can see that when we hover over one of these blue areas, we get that sub-watershed name of the reach, as well as the average persistence value within that reach segment. And so we look at one of these red areas, this is a bit different watershed here right to the west, but we can see that persistence is very low, about 1 to 2%. And areas of gray here on these reach segments indicate segments that had no productive vegetation in them over the past 40 years. And so some of those other layers that we can color this valley bottom polygon as are, as Derek described, this active floodplain here. So this is, again, that proportion of the reach segment that has had consistently productive vegetation on it. So picture this like what proportion of that reach has green vegetation consistently on it. This distance to core selector. So this briefly just shows how close you are to the nearest core sagebrush area. So these areas in the darker blues to black indicate we're within a few kilometers of the nearest core sagebrush area, as well as stream type. So we show either perennial, intermittent, or ephemeral stream type here. And this can be extremely useful for determining efficacy of some restoration practices to really know how frequently or how often water is running through that stream system or on the landscape. And so going back to this persistence layer, how exactly can we use this to identify potentially degraded floodplains in which mesic restoration practices would be most beneficial? And so I like to use this case as an example here, but largely we're looking for these areas of lower average persistence indicated by the red to yellow areas that are flanked up and downstream by higher persistence areas, indicating that there's likely sufficient water resources in the floodplain up and downstream to maintain those higher persistence values. But as we see, if we go down here, or upstream in this case, from this higher persistence segment here, we get down to 52%, 37%, all the way down to 17%. And then as we go upstream again, it starts to increase again up to 70 to 90%. So this can indicate that vegetation in this intermediary floodplain here is something's happening there that's not allowing that vegetation to stay productive despite those resources above and below stream. And if we reduce this layer opacity here and look at just the base map satellite imagery, we can see that this area in particular, we can see just that narrow strip of green areas across this rather larger floodplain. And so if we click on that, take off that layer app, we can get those summary statistics that Derek mentioned. So that average persistence of this segment, as well as the active floodplain. So only about 18% of this polygon floodplain is taken up by that green strip. It's about 13.5 acres large, so rather big, but the average slope here is under 2 degrees. And we get some statistics about how close the nearest core growth opportunity area is. We also see the stream type here, which watershed it's within, as well as if it's on a BLM allotment or not. And so we also include this beaver restoration assessment, or BRAT tool outputs, also developed by the Riverscapes Consortium group, which largely mean to sort of help us decide if an area is feasible for beaver dam analogs or reintroduction of beaver into a system. In this case, they say dam building is possible and it may be appropriate for translocation. Again, we get the same sort of time series over this area. of the drawn polygon. And so I want to use the next couple minutes here to show some of these cooler features of the tool itself. So I'll bring that opacity up a bit more and delete that segment and zoom out just a bit. And so, like I said, you can switch between all these modules seamlessly using this dropdown here. But what I haven't said yet is that it keeps your same zoom and location on the map when you switch. So say we're looking at the Valley Bottoms app here right now, and say we want to look at the Mesic landscapes or look at this area on a pixelized basis. So you click on the Mesic landscapes there. It keeps our exact extent and zoom. And now we can see, the same sort of picture, though at a pixel scale, where we have these large, productive floodplains up and downstream of this segmented area here, where only a small sliver of productive vegetation is remaining there. And similarly, if we want to go to the Mesic watersheds and see which tier this is, remember what watershed it was giving us on the segments. This was Long Hollow Creek, so this is a tier 3 watershed, meaning we've identified it as strategically managed. And that is largely because if we go back to the Mesic Valley Bottoms app here, much of the watershed is taken up by, relatively little or no productive vegetation, meaning it's largely just an inherently water limited system. And that, the best opportunities are really in these areas that have already existing water resources here. All right, so some other cool features here is the ability to pan this map. So if you hold Control on your keyboard and grab the map and drag upwards or side to side, you can actually look at an oblique view of the landscape if that's something you're interested in. I also want to mention here that next to all of our Mesic layers here, we have this little eye floating icon, as well as next to the context layers that you can click and get just a bit more information about maybe how that layer was calculated or where it comes from. We also have the ability to change this to dark mode if you wish, as well as some really useful links here at the bottom. So this user guide link provides a much more in-depth explanation to all of these layers and how you can interpret them on the landscape. And we also have this data download link here that will let you download all 3 of these Mesic layers at scales of either the entire Sagebrush biome, an entire state, or even just a county level extent to bring this data into your own GIS and do some of your own analyses that way. And finally, I want to mention that this app is also fully usable on mobile or tablet. So say you want to bring this out to the field and have internet access, you can click this center on my location button here in the top left, allow the browser to see your location, and it will zoom to your area on the map. So you can do a little site selection and see where you are on the map itself. Right now, it's going to zoom to Missoula, Montana, where we are in the university campus, which is outside the biome. So we're not going to see anything right now, but just to get a sense of how that would work. And at that, I'll stop the demo and hand it back to Kelly.
Our first question is MAP appropriate for monitoring post-treatment changes?
As we talked about before, there's a ton of different metrics that could be measured out there, right? So what we've come up with is a single metric that we believe is kind of like back to your first principles. If you don't have water, we don't have mesic resources. And so NDVI is one metric, and this persistence metric is one way of monitoring efficacy of a lot of the restoration that we've been trying to teach and promote. And so, yeah, we believe at the right scale, these are 30-meter pixels, right? So 30 meter by 30 meter is the inside of a baseball diamond on a field. Okay. So if your project is smaller than that, we might not be able to pick it up. You start doing things at scale, this is a type of tool that could be helpful for monitoring that change in this particular way.
That just follow up that image you showed of the actual project where the NDVI bounced and persistence really bounce. You could actually see it very clearly. So
How sure can we be that the platform is accurately identifying mesic areas?
Yeah, so as Jeremy mentioned, we're relying on Landsat satellite imagery, so it's only a resolution of 30 by 30 meters. So, we can expect to lose some of those smaller stream systems, maybe in those higher elevation headwater systems. Um, and I also just want to make the point here that, we built this tool primarily as a planning stage tool in the decision-making process, um, really to guide people to the right area to go out and field visit a site to determine if restoration practices are actually feasible. Of course, satellite imagery can't tell us everything, so it's not going to tell us, water rights going on in a stream, up and downstream issues that may or may not make restoration or conservation feasible. Um, so yeah, keep in mind that this is meant to be a planning tool that ultimately does not replace on the ground, local knowledge of a site.
Can you elaborate on how MAP should be used alongside the SCD and the Defend the Core strategy?
Through our Working Lands for Wildlife frameworks, we've kind of applied this common defend the core concept. And I guess it's from our collective experience over the years that it's hard to fix Humpty Dumpty once it's broken. So imagine a riparian area that looks like the Grand Canyon that got incised 50 years ago or 100 years ago is much more difficult to restore than a 2 foot head cut on a wet meadow. Um, so this is the type of strategy that we're trying to combine now from our water and our uplands. And if you apply both of those together, that's where this overlap with the SCD, especially the watershed scale, if you're prioritizing funding, but even down to like a reach scale or a mesic landscape scale, you can think about, coupling good mesic restoration with healthy uplands and like uplifting the whole carrying capacity of that landscape. So you're really doubling down on that defend the core concept.
What are your plans to add other regions or states outside of the sagebrush biome?
yeah, it gets a little bit tricky. So that NDVI works very well in our arid sites in the Great Basin and the rest of the sagebrush biome. But as you move eastward into places with more precip or monsoonal precip, it kind of falls apart. So yeah, it would be great, but it's a little bit different animal. So for now, no plans. We'll run with this for a while and see what's needed out there.
Thoughts on differentiating between degraded stream reaches versus losing reaches due to underlying geology. Sorry.
No remotely sensed planning tool will replace boots on the ground gut check of what's actually happening. And so what this is designed to do is save you from bouncing around a 10,000 acre ranch with no context. And so you could look at this stuff before you ever go out and have a few targeted locations to go scope out and maximize your time in the field. So when you get there, what they're talking about is some geology, water just goes subterranean, right? So we don't have the green groceries. And you'll be able to see that when you get to the landscape and read the landscape and understand if there's been some incision of that floodplain or not. You also could see it in the data. So historically, if you had a lot of productivity and then for some reason it drops off the cliff in the last 40 years, you'll be able to see that. So that's more likely something that's a degradation versus a geologic formation.
Y'all are asking such great questions. What about the watersheds that aren't classified? How did you decide to exclude them? This
I
was
can take
directed
this.
towards Chris.
Yep, I can take this one. Yeah, without going too far into the details here, there's a paper currently in review that goes on about how those watersheds tiers were exactly classified, but it's largely a flow chart that we used. We first asked, is there upland habitat as defined by that SCD? And next we go on to say or ask, are there abundant high persistent vegetation there? So in this case, we did greater than 65% of the valley bottoms in that watershed had that higher persistence vegetation. If so, we called that tier one. Tier two was a bit more of a mix between lower persistence values and higher persistence. And then tier three is only about 15% of the valley bottoms in the watershed had persistently productive vegetation on them. But all three incorporate, the overlap with the SCD and persistent vegetation. So the unclassified watersheds at that point did not have one of those two.
Landsat NIR is a 30 megapixel resolution. Does the Mesic tool do any kind of downscaling or upscaling through interpolation to support various resolution needs?
I can also take this one. Yeah, as Jeremy mentioned, it's currently using 30-meter resolution. So again, we don't do any interpolation to make that finer. So everything within those valley bottoms is just being averaged, a 30-meter average within those polygons. In a future update, we have discussed maybe incorporating the 10-meter sentinel data as a newer version to look at persistence, but that would only give us about 10 years of data. So
what audience has been using the tool the most, i.e., who has gotten the most traction with it so far?
Well, we have history here because I mentioned the SGI Mesic app. So when we sunsetted that, several years ago, I heard all about it from the people that were using it. And it's a lot of our folks out there trying to do actual mesic restoration on the ground. So think about your conservation practitioners and planners, those of you that have been doing the low tech restoration, and you kind of want to see what's going on with, did my project work? Did I bend the needle on this? And so we built this for that audience. It's really for the practitioner who wants to scale up riparian and mesic restoration. Is it useful for others? Absolutely. And if you're a producer, we believe, working with our partner here at Mythos, we've created a web app that's really user friendly. So hopefully you can get in and navigate and it makes sense, but it has a lot of technical data in it too. So it's really designed to empower our practitioners with the information they need to prioritize where they want to work, and also kind of track how things are going through time.